Welcome to the Dive Site Podcast by Fat Guy Scuba, where we share stories, laughs, and everything scuba diving. Today we're going to be talking about something a little chillier than usual, cold water diving, Arizona style. Yep, just because we're in the desert doesn't mean we don't freeze our fins off from now and then. From surprise thermoclines at Lake Pleasant to dry suit adventures at Lake Mojave, cold water diving just hits different when you're not expecting it. So grab a warm drink and let's dive in. Tonight we've got DJ, Matt, James, and Chris. Everybody want to say hi?
Hi, everybody.
Hey, how's it going?
From Tucson.
Right. So let's talk about the feel of cold water diving. We'll go into some gear prep. We'll go into where our favorites are. We'll talk about the safety and planning of cold water diving. Let's jump into the appeal of cold water diving. I know for us here in Phoenix, the appeal of cold water diving is the visibility that we get is better than when it's not cold. We also have to deal less with lake traffic, right? Because it's cold. People aren't boating. They're not out paddle boarding, stuff like that, right?
Yeah, and the visibility does get a lot better towards the end of the boating season. After everything starts to settle, it gets a little cooler out and the water kind of chills down. We lose that thermocline as well.
Yes, which is a positive and a negative.
It is, yeah.
James, you've been diving longer than all of us out at Lake Pleasant. What's your appeal to cold water diving? I mean, I know everybody would rather be in the Caribbean, but there are places where you have been where you travel with your dry suit and stuff. But what's your appeal for cold water diving?
Yeah, I think you guys hit one of the main topics, which is the visibility, right? The visibility for cold water is generally unmatched. Now, if you find some perfect area in the Caribbean, then lucky you. You can get comparable visibility with much warmer temperatures. But everybody definitely uses cold water to their advantage on the visibility front. I think for the main appeal is preservation. So the colder the water, the less things decay or deteriorate. And that really rings true in the Great Lakes. It's a prime example. They've got ships there that look like they could sail, and they've been down there for 100, 150, 200 years. And you can't find that anywhere. You can't find that in the ocean. A 200-year-old wreck. Even some of these big military ships are really going to be in garbage condition, and part of that's the saltwater versus freshwater. But there's no coral reefs growing in the Great Lakes, and those sea animals do take a toll on the ships, whether they're steel or wood. So cold water preserves things, preserves time, and that's not something that we can ever get back, right? We can't. We can make new wrecks, but we can't ever get that stuff back, and we can't get that history back. So the only thing we can do is preserve it when it's been lost to the water or the depths. So for me, that's the main driver.
That's very well said. And that brings up a very good point. That's something that I never would have thought of would have been the preservation. I always just think of the cold water being, the visibility, right? Because my experience of diving quote unquote cold water is the lake here in Arizona, Lake Mojave or Willow Springs up near Laughlin, and then Catalina. So there's not really a whole lot that you have to preserve there. There's the school bus and a couple other things down at Lake Mojave, but that stuff is all new enough, right? Like we're not going to see major decay of that in our lifetime, I don't think. So, but yeah, I would have never thought about the preservation of stuff being a factor in that.
It definitely is nice when the visibility starts coming up at the lake too, because there's different portions of the year that you can do different types of training, and a lot of us do a majority of the training during the summer, and the visibility is not the best, but honing in some of those skills, it's almost like you get the payoff of, okay, now the boats are leaving, the traffic's leaving the lake, visibility's starting to come up, and the visibility's starting to come up, and you just get the additional benefit of all the things that you've worked for and worked towards throughout the year. And it's just kind of like a little present for you. Get out to the lake and you're like, oh my gosh, I can see everything that I couldn't see before. Yeah. And I don't know why I didn't find this last time I was out here. Oh, that's right, because the visibility was like 3 feet.
Correct.
Yeah.
But the water was warm. So, but on the other aspect with cold water diving is gear associated to that too, right? So, I mean, we're talking 50-degree water. We're not talking rash guards anymore. We're talking 7 mils or semi-dries or dry suits with undergarments. And
Yeah, in a lot of cases, that's yeah. And I just learned something. I just sat through a demo night with one of our vendor reps, and I didn't really. I've never thought about this. And James, maybe you can weigh in, as you've got more experience than the three of us here. I was told that when you have your 7 mil and you get down to depth, that neoprene compresses and it loses its efficiency as a thermal barrier. You know, 7 mil becomes more like a 5 mil or like a 6 mil or something like that. And I've never thought of that. I know the neoprene compresses, right? Because water pressure compresses the things, but I would have never thought about that. And that was one of his selling points about diving dry suit too. And this was also a dry suit demo night. But yeah, having the thermal protection and stuff.
Yeah, that's 100% right. It's actually a real issue because a lot of shops don't explain it to the customer that way, maybe because they don't know or they haven't looked, or, thought about it that way. But when you're diving, you're wearing out those wetsuits, right? They're not as efficient, like you said, thermally, from an insulation perspective. They're not as efficient when they're deeper or the more pressure they have on them, and they wear out because of the constant cycling of pressure. So when you look at cost per dive over the long term, a dry suit is way more economical.
Yeah.
Right. You're looking at a nice wetsuit. You're into it for, let's say, $500, right? Give or take.
Oh, easy.
And a dry suit's significantly more expensive, right? You're looking at, let's say, $2,000. But are you going to buy more than 4 wetsuits in your lifetime?
Probably.
Probably. Definitely.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, probably.
So when you look at the cost per dive, and then when you look at the performance of a dry suit versus a wetsuit, not even the same ballpark. And of course, there's different types of dry suits, blah blah blah. Yeah, you're 100% right. Next time, if you want to really see what it is, and I think it's from like a 7 mil, it goes down to, depending on how many dives you have on it, can go down to like a 3 or 4 mil. It's very significant. And take a spare glove down there next time and see how much it's compressed at 100 feet. I think you'll be surprised.
Yeah. Well, that's one of the things that I've noticed. I spent last winter, I had my Hollis semi-dry, and so that's an 876, and I was coming from a 7 mil. I want to say it was like a Henderson or something like that, or a Neotech or something like that. It wasn't a super nice wetsuit. I got it super cheap online, but I always, even the first time using it, I maintained that it was never incredibly warm. Like even just grabbing the rental wetsuits from the shop, I felt warmer in the bare rentals that our shop rents versus the 7 mil that I own. And after I got my semi-dry, it was way more noticeable. I want to get into a dry suit because I hate putting that semi-dry on. There's a reason the podcast is called Fat Guy Scuba. But with that, I will say that I was noticeably more comfortable on colder dives. I still get cold in it. When we were up in Willow Beach a couple weeks ago, I was still way cold in it, and was not a great time
water
for some of those.
61.
But yeah,
That was 60.
it was definitely much more noticeable.
So go ahead, James.
I was just going to say, you guys can look at this, objectively, right? So if we talk about going back to our open water course, every time we double the pressure, we have the volume, right? So an insulation is made in the neoprene by air. So as you double the pressure, you're having essentially that thickness or that.
Yeah, you're reducing that by half.
Right. So, at 100 feet, you've doubled it a couple of times, right? So you've halved it and then halved it again. That gives you your final, essentially there'll be a little bit of structure, right, in the rubber, but that's essentially it.
Yeah, no, that's a great call out.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's something, it's kind of a misunderstood thing when it comes to dry suits. A lot of people think, okay, you got a dry suit, you must be warm all the time. That's not necessarily the case.
Yeah.
If you don't plan the right undergarments that are associated with the dry suit, you can definitely be cold. There's benefits. There's back draws to it as well. If you don't plan the right undergarments, you're definitely going to be cold, but you're still going to be dry.
In theory,
In theory, unless you have a leaking seal somewhere, or your zipper doesn't get closed up all the way, or you blow out a neck seal or something while you're diving. There's a lot of downsides to it as well. And you can also be too warm, which I recently found out in Catalina.
yeah. You absolutely can, and that's a very fantastic call out on planning the right gear around that. I know an instructor who is, when he got his dry suit, he bought the Scuba Pro Arctic underwear basically, and it's basically like putting on a suit of styrofoam. Talking to him about it, he had to put on an additional like 35 pounds.
My gosh.
It was absolutely crazy. I think he bought it thinking that he was going to need it for Catalina, and I think it was a bit overkill. I also don't know that he was properly weighted or anything like that, but he, on his BC that he wears, I can tell you that he wears a Scuba Pro Hydros Pro. I can tell you that he had all of the weight in all of the pockets plus a weight belt and still had issues getting down and staying down.
That's understandable depending on what the thermal capabilities are of that thermal barrier. So for example, that new undergarment that I had to add on additional weight more than I was anticipating because of the amount of airspace that was held open for that insulating factor. Just like James was talking about, right? So that crushed neoprene, as you go deeper, it doesn't hold as much oxygen. It's not as insulated. Same thing with that undergarment. It's a lot fluffier. So it adds that air barrier, which we all know air is buoyant. So we have to compensate with more weight. So that was something that I wasn't anticipating.
Yeah. And as you said, and James mentioned earlier, with adding some of that, diving dry suit, everybody says, as soon as you get into diving a dry suit, you learn your buoyancy all over again.
Yeah.
You learn how to quote unquote manage the bubble in your dry suit. It's, it's learning how to adjust that. It's learning how to adjust yourself. And in a lot of cases, it's adding more weight. That was the biggest misconception when I first started looking into getting a dry suit. I wanted a dry suit. I'm being a bigger guy. When I first started diving, our first trip to Catalina, I think I had to wear something like 34, 36 pounds of weight or something like that.
We were almost at 30.
Granted, I was also probably pushing almost 300 pounds. When I first got that, the semi-dry, the Hollis, I want to say the first couple times I took it out to the lake, I was still in 26 pounds. When we were at Mojave and Willow Beach, I think you and I had a conversation about it. Driving back from diving one day, I think I had 18 or 16 pounds, and I probably could have dropped 2 pounds out of it. So yeah, but it's adding that weight. It's changing your buoyancy. It's changing your configuration.
And that's what I had. That's what I had a question about, because I'm not in a dry suit yet. And, I hear things about, changing your buoyancy, additional weight. I mean, I finally got my weight down to, solid numbers. I know my configuration inside and out, know my numbers. And it's like, okay, I'm 220. If I get into a dry suit, all right, I mean, how much more weight am I looking at putting on? I mean, am I adding an additional 15, 20 more pounds with this, with an aluminum cylinder and a regular BC? Or it's the question of buoyancy that brings it up with dry suits and me, and weighting.
I think James can better answer that, but I think it's just going to depend on your undergarments.
Well, yeah, that too.
Yeah. Yep. That's you manage that with the undergarments, right? And you can span the gamut. You guys have talked about a couple already. You had the Scuba Pro undergarments, which is like that body armor thing.
Looking the K2, yeah.
K2, that's right. Yep. Yeah. And that's got a lot of buoyancy, right? It's got pads. You've got, some fourth element stuff that have the argon pads in strategic places on the body. And then you've got weasels, which Matt talked about being too hot for the wintertime in Catalina.
I tell you what.
Which I dive that and ice diving. So yeah, I would say that that's probably a little overkill. That being said, I do dive it for, longer dives that aren't as cold, right? So if you're in 50-degree water and you're gonna go for 3 hours, that's a prime undergarment there.
Sure.
But yeah, your weight increase from a, let's say, a 7 mil to a dry suit and thin undergarments, you might actually decrease. You might shed 8 pounds or something like that. Or if you put a weasel on, then you might add 6 to 8 pounds.
Yep.
So really, the undergarments drive how much insulation you have, drives the amount of additional weight that you need.
I'd like to also add on that too, when it comes to a dry suit, if you're just picking one up off the shelf and, tossing it on, every body's shaped differently. And if you start going in with a custom size that's custom fit for you, it's going to be shaped more towards your body. And when it comes to squeezing the air out before you start your initial descent, you're going to have a better opportunity to have less pockets for air or anything along those lines with a custom suit versus one that you pick up off the shelf that might have a lot of wrinkles and places for air to get caught up in and, suit performance underwater.
So, I mean, what are some...
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry, good, James.
Sorry. Yeah, a good fitting suit is going to make that transition a lot easier. Most of us don't start out in good fitting suits for our first dry suit, right? We just buy what we can, or what
Sure.
we
Can
have
afford.
a deal on or whatever.
Yep.
Yeah, to kind of dip our toe into the water.
What our friends give
And
us.
yeah, exactly. That's kind of how we get into it, and then eventually we get into a nicer suit that fits us well. Full disclosure, I think we're pretty much talking about tri-lam suits here, right? If we're talking
Sure.
about neoprene
Yeah.
suits,
Yeah.
that's a totally different.
Correct. Yeah. Neoprene suits are a completely different animal, and we can talk about that on a later episode. But yeah, this was more geared toward around, tri-lam, bi-lam suits, stuff like that. The one thing that I did want to point out too is the undergarments and the comfortability of it all. There is no hard and fast that says if you're going to be in this temperature of water, you need this thickness of a wetsuit or this thickness of a dry suit, or, dry suit undergarments or a heated vest or what have you. I can tell you that 78-degree water and I'm great in a 3 mil wetsuit for an hour to an hour and a half. I also know another diver that I've taught in classes that is good in a 3 mil for an hour at like 55 degrees at the lake.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, personal comfortability, I guess, personal cold tolerance, I guess you'd call it. Yeah, personal preference in that kind of thing. I can tell you that my lower half of my body doesn't get incredibly cold. It's usually always my core area, my chest area. So when I start diving dry suit, I would imagine that I'll probably have thinner undergarments and on my legs at least. So
yeah, I mean, there's different options. You can definitely start out with, thinner undergarments, or just some people will do thermals. Just, camping thermals and a heated vest. And they're usually good with that, or some socks. It just depends on different options that you go with on the dry suit too, whether you're going to go with the neoprene socks or you're going to go with the built-in rock boots. Anything there too, because there's different options, right? Other considerations that we haven't really touched on this evening, talking about hoods too. Obviously with our semi-dries, they've got the built-in hoods. There's different thicknesses of hoods available too, all the way up to, well, I couldn't honestly tell you what millimeter, but
11.
That's pretty thick. Is that the orange ones that you have?
No, those orange ones, those are I think those are 810s, but there's some thicker ones out there on the market. They're closer to 11. But again, they lose their efficiency as you dive them.
yeah.
I'll buy one and dive it for a month or something, on a trip when I really need good thermal protection. And then when I bring it back here to Phoenix, it's still, a great hood. Still, maybe it's now 9 mils thick, but it's not 11. So
Yeah.
I might buy a new one for the next, cold water trip or something like that, and use that one for, less cold things, I guess.
So we've talked a little bit about gear, and I know one of the big aspects of cold water diving is going to be like dive planning and safety. So I would say for planning, at least for recreational diving, what are your thoughts on that, Chris, for planning a cold water dive?
For planning that in cold water, you really want to just basically make sure you're covered head to toe, making sure that we're good and taking into aspects. Also dive time. It's like, all right, what's my protection? How long am I going to be down for on a plan? And is this going to be good enough? Some of the things also, as you said, comfortability and stuff like that. I mean, I recently got 5 mil gloves for the lake, and thermally they're great. But as for
Can't do anything in them.
being ambidextrous with this and trying to use and touch buttons and
Dexterity's not there, right?
dexterity is not there. Thermal's great, but if I really got to use my hands and start touching and doing stuff on my computer, I'm like, yeah, that's not exactly there.
What do you think about in between dives? Like, say, for example, if we're in Catalina and it's kind of cold outside.
The other thing about that, what you said, just in regards to that, we were doing that nav class that one time, and just coming in and out of that wetsuit, the wind was whipping, and I was losing feeling in my fingers. I was getting like almost hypothermic, and that's when it clicked in my head. I said, you know what? I gotta start thinking about dry suit. This wetsuit stuff is getting old very fast.
Yeah, and when it comes to cold water diving too, a lot of people think during the summer it's like you got to make sure that you're hydrated, stay hydrated. Well, it's got to be just important when you're diving in cold water too, because your body's got to move all that heat, and it's going to be expelling a lot of energy.
And you guys that run the fill station or whatever, I mean, you guys know this just as well as any knowledgeable diver knows. Every breath you take on that regulator, you're removing moisture from your body. I mean, you're breathing in dried air. But no, you were talking about in between dives, man.
Yeah.
Hot drinks, hot chocolate or hot cocoa or coffee or
Boat coats.
Boat coats.
Boat coats are important.
Yeah, man.
Those are a lifesaver.
I love my boat coat. I bought Christy and I one when we were after our first Catalina trip. I was Christmas shopping and saw that they had some, and I was like, yep, getting some of these. Mm-hmm. And they're fantastic. Every trip to the lake, whether it's the middle of the summer and it's 118 out, or it's the middle of winter and it's 50 degrees in the water and air temperature, I still have my boat coat out. It's great for keeping you warm in between dives, especially when the wind's blowing and it's cooler out. But to change into, or to use to change with as well, changing into dry clothes.
That's if you're diving wet.
All right. Well, yes, that is if you're diving.
We're driving wet.
But yeah, that is also very, I mean, I would say keeping yourself comfortable and warming your body up in between dives is probably just as important as what you're wearing and how you're keeping yourself warm on your dive.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, because once you start shivering, I mean, I think everybody in this conversation has had a point where you've been diving and you're like, oh my gosh, I'm shivering, I'm shaking underwater or at the surface. That takes up a lot of energy. That takes up a lot of, it takes up a lot.
Well, and we're in a very unique situation. Most people can be cold or wet. Most people do not like being wet and cold. It's usually one or the other. And, we're, as divers, we're in that unique position, especially since we dive the lake most of the time, that it's cold and we are cold and wet.
Yeah, absolutely. Going back to the dry suits, yeah, they definitely have the advantages when it comes to in between dives, because the only thing realistically, unless you have built-in gloves or dry gloves, the only thing that really gets wet is from the neck up, which is important, obviously, to keep warm. But in between dives, you can pop your dry suit open and, kind of just hang out and everything in there is warm. But unless you have a leak, which is unfortunate. I've had a couple. James has probably had more than a couple, but it's unfortunate when it does happen, because then your undergarments become wet, and especially if you're on a boat, on a liveaboard, unless you bring a backup semi-dry or wetsuit, you're going to be cold unless you get the opportunity to dry it out as well. So definitely good times to have a dry suit. You were talking about how much you didn't care as far as what it takes to put on a wetsuit or the semi-dry, right? Sometimes it's a little more difficult to put a dry suit on with the amount of undergarments that you have.
Sure.
Some days it just does not want to go on right. Slipping everything on, getting the undergarments on, throwing it together, bleeding the air out of the suit, and then you lose a little bit of dexterity. It becomes a little uncomfortable. Dexterity loss on a dry suit is probably more than what you would imagine to begin with, especially when you start descending and you don't add air to your suit and you get the suit squeeze. It's an interesting experience, to say the least.
All right. Well, let's move along. Favorite cold water experiences?
None.
Well, no, that's not true, right?
No, I mean, cold. Nope.
Well, no, I mean, it's, cold water. I mean, right. The term cold water is subjective because what's cold to you may not be cold to me, or vice versa. So favorite dive where you've had to wear a dry suit or a thicker wetsuit?
Honestly, some of my most favorite colder dives, and I'll say colder because I had a lot more dives out at Lake Pleasant in the semi-dry, and it felt colder to me during those, was initially coming off of the wall for the first few times and hitting that thermocline towards the end of summer, kind of getting closer to winter type thing, where the thermocline was starting to come up and dropping off that, and it's getting cold, and it's like, oh my gosh, the visibility is fantastic out here. I've never seen out this way before. This is awesome. And then finding the rail and following the rail out and coming back, and it just felt like such a cool dive, and seeing some of the bigger fish and some of the unknown out there at Lake Pleasant. I know it's not a big hurrah. That's what I've got.
Chris?
I would probably have to say the last dives that we just went on at Willow Beach, being 60 degrees. It's cold. It's cold Colorado water. Colorado River water coming right up from the dam. The visibility was amazing, and heck, it was almost a drift dive pretty much. But seeing the water clarity and the way the river was moving, and just the bottom, wasn't expecting that dive site, being our first time out there. I wasn't expecting to see, sand and river grass and all that stuff. I thought it was going to be like just boulders and rocks, just like the lake. It was a different thing, but I guess the cold water, no algae growth, keeps everything nice. I'm gonna have to say that's, for cold water, that's probably my favorite one now.
That was definitely colder than Mojave.
Yes.
Yeah.
Mojave was warmer, but yeah, Willow was definitely 60. My computer said 60, 61, but I like that one. Definitely want to do that again.
I would say my favorite is probably Catalina. The last Catalina trip that I made, I finally got to see a giant sea bass, and it was super cool. I will never forget that dive. I was just kind of zoned out, swimming along, not really paying what's attention in front of me. I was just kind of looking down at some of the stuff underneath. And when Christy grabbed my attention and showed me the big sea bass up in front of us.
That's when we were on that dive together, right?
Yep.
That's fantastic.
Yep. That is probably my favorite cold water dive. And I mean, it's the kelp forest, right? Like there is nothing like the kelp forest.
I think my lure more so is shipwrecks, but
Sure.
I haven't really done any cold water shipwrecks yet.
Sure.
Which probably leads us into James as far as cold water favorites.
Yep. I know, James, you've done a bunch of cold water diving. You've been to the Mediterranean to do some, and then I know you've just done a trip up to the Great Lakes not long ago.
Tell us.
Yeah.
Yeah. You're like, pick one, right? I don't know if that's possible.
One for the year. How about that?
Still difficult. So I'll give you kind of three different scenarios, and they're all kind of my favorites for different reasons. All cold water. So a real famous one is the Plura Cave in Norway, right? That was amazing. To cut a hole in the ice and dive under the ice to access a cave, and then continue to dive in this cave for 2 to 3 hours at 35 degrees was amazing, right? And you bring lots of heated gear, lots of batteries, and it goes deep too, of course. So you're looking at the deepest sections, about 120 meters. So that was just an incredible dive. Ancient carved marble ceilings, fantastic.
That
Just
sounds
really loved it.
phenomenal.
Yeah.
Yeah, visibility forever, right? It was great. And then there's other ones. So the shipwrecks at the Great Lakes. If you guys haven't done that, that's a bucket list thing. You guys have to do that. It doesn't matter if you do it recreationally or if you go over to Alpena area and do some, more of the technical trimix deep stuff, which is significantly more challenging, of course, to do that in cold water than a recreational dive. But even recreational or light technical up in the Mackinac Straits, I recommend that everybody experiences that in their life. It's the history is just too rich there to pass up. And then, we've got Lake Pleasant, right? So let's say it's 50 some degrees. I've done, 4 or 5 hour dives in that 50-degree water. And at that point, you're tapping into a DPV to keep all your heated gear running, right? So head to toe, gloves, socks, full body, all that sort of stuff, just to survive. Because it doesn't matter. You'll lose the thermal battle eventually. You just can't. You can't,
Yeah.
it doesn't matter what gear you have, doesn't matter how much money you spent, you will lose that battle eventually. And just the satisfaction of being, immersed in that for that long, it was great, and I came back up to the surface and I had people, kind of help me, assist me get out of my gear because you're just locked up.
Frozen.
It's just, yeah, I mean, you're frozen, you've drained all your energy. You're just like, I'm just gonna sit here for a while, but people are like, no, let's get you out of the gear, let's get you some food, that sort of stuff. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
and some of those cold water dives are interesting because of the topography and the visibility. Some of them are interesting because of the history. Some of them are interesting because of the logistics and planning involved. But I think ultimately, cold water offers anything you want to do, any itch you need to scratch, it is available in the cold water flavor.
I agree with that.
Definitely a shout out to Venture Heat for the products that they make when it comes to heated vests and stuff like that, because it is phenomenal. I personally think, with the limited experience that I have, it's been an amazing product for sure when it comes to cold water diving.
Yeah. And if
It's
they're, go ahead, James. Sorry.
It's a great product, and I think one thing that we can't forget is, we've talked about hydration. Everybody talks about hydration being, a DCS contributor and this and that, but thermal,
Yeah.
just being comfortable is the number one safety, I guess, increase or improvement that you can do. So the Venture Heat Vest unlocks a lot of safety upside for us that we didn't have, years and years ago. So agree, totally. Huge shout out. And those products have been coming into the market and getting better, and that's great. That's good for all divers.
Yeah. And, if they're looking for honest gear reviews and want to send us a few products, I'd be willing to try some out.
Absolutely.
Definitely.
Absolutely. To kind of add on to what James was talking about too, when it comes to technical diving, one of the benefits of those heated vests is if you don't use the heated vest to its fullest capacity when you're doing your dive, one of the most benefits that you can use is when you start your decompressions and you're on your deco stops, you can kick that vest up, and what that does is that helps raise your core temperature, and it allows you to off gas a lot better too, which can help prevent the DCS, or it helps with the off gassing as well.
Perfect.
Definitely one of the best times to start using it.
All right. Well, we have talked about our favorites in the cold water, where, our favorite type of cold water or favorite location for cold water. We've talked about safety and dive planning for cold water. We have talked about the gear and the appeal for diving in colder waters. I think that about wraps up for the night.
I think so. Yeah.
I think we're good. Kind of hit all the way around.
All right. Well, thank you everybody for joining in and listening to us. This has been another episode of the Dive Site Podcast by Fat Guy Scuba.